This edition of the Bio Report is brought to you by the California Technology Council, providing discounts on products and services essential to every startup. For more information, visit californiatechnology.org/member benefits. I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. As medical advances have helped extend lifespans, older people still experience a decline in the quality of their lives in later years as a result of diseases associated with aging. This can cause a loss of independence, isolation, and suffering. The Biogerontology Research Foundation, a United Kingdom-based nonprofit, is funding work to understand the molecular and cellular processes of aging and develop biotechnological interventions to halt or reverse damage from it. We spoke to Franco Cortese, Deputy Director of the Biogerontology Research Foundation, about a new report it's issued that characterizes the longevity and geroscience landscape today, areas of research that hold promise, and why aging might best be thought of as a disease. Franco, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Daniel.
We're going to talk about the biological process of aging, what's understood, and what hopes are held out by emerging biogerontology industry to halt or reverse those biological processes. Perhaps we can begin with your organization itself, the Biogerontology Research Foundation. What is it, what's its mission, and how does it operate?
Sure. So it's, as far as we know, the United Kingdom's oldest charity focused on aging research and public outreach and education regarding the importance of geroscience, which is the science of aging, and the pressing need for a paradigm shift in healthcare away from reactionary single-disease treatment towards preventive multi-disease treatment. It was founded in 2008 by Alex Shevoronkov, who some of your listeners might know as the author of The Ageless Generation, which came out in 2013. We focus on aging research and on public outreach and education on the importance of geroscience.
What is aging from a biological perspective?
Well, I would turn to the 2013 paper in Cell called The Hallmarks of Aging, which essentially attempted to break down the underlying biological mechanisms underlying aging to sort of provide a consensus for the field in the same way that the Hallmarks of Cancer paper did for cancer. It's a variety of forms of molecular and cellular damage that accrue over time and underlie the aging process, and by virtue thereof, the large majority of chronic diseases afflicting developed nations today, from cancer to cardiovascular disease to Alzheimer's, etc.
While there are a number of diseases like those you mentioned that are thought of as diseases of aging, should we think of aging itself as a disease?
Yes, I think we should, in the sense that aging is the largest risk factor for the majority of chronic diseases afflicting developed nations today. There has been some pushback for categorizing aging as a disease because it's universal and it affects all of us. But I think it's without question that it's a process that's become rather well understood over the past few decades, and a process that is modifiable via intervention, and that underlies a lot of the chronic ill health of old age.
Your foundation just released an 800-page report mapping the longevity industry and geroscience landscape for the first time. Some people may be surprised how active a landscape this is. Can you offer some broad brushstrokes as to how big it is and how deep the research that's going on is today? And what, if any, therapeutic pipeline there may be out there, and whether there's a commercial dimension to this industry?
Sure. Well, one of the main conclusions we drew from creating this report was that the size of the geroscience research landscape from an academic and nonprofit perspective is a lot larger than we thought, and I believe that a lot of the practitioners of the field think as well. For instance, we've profiled over 100 research labs and nonprofits. I think a lot of people within the community are familiar with the sort of heavy hitters like SENS Research Foundation and the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. But it was a surprising finding that the total size of the research landscape is actually quite large.
And in terms of the investment landscape, how much money is going into this field, and are there dedicated funds? Is this attracting investment from traditional life science players?
Yeah, well, there are a number of longevity-focused VC funds that have sprung up in the past few years, such as the Methuselah Fund, Apollo Ventures, Deep Knowledge Life Sciences, Longevity Fund, Longevity VC. There are about a half dozen, at least, that we're aware of. I would say that, well, of course, the longevity industry started a little while ago, I would say with the launch of Geron in 1990 by Mike West. But there was a bit of a winter for a decade or two. And I think that the prospect of a serious longevity industry wasn't really considered by most mainstream investors until around 2013. With the formation of Calico by Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, founded by Arthur Levinson, who was the former chairman of Apple. And the company was funded to the tune of $1.5 billion from Apple and from AbbVie.
I think people think of Art Levinson more in the context of his work as CEO of Genentech.
Yes, yeah. That as well. But I would say that 2013 really marked the turning of a tide in terms of a serious longevity industry. That year also saw the formation of Human Longevity Inc., founded by Craig Venter and Peter Diamandis. And once, very well-funded longevity companies entered the field, I think that really marked a turning point for a lot of people. Another really heavy hitter was Unity Biotechnologies, which raised $116 million in Series B funding, which is a rather large amount of money for a company focused on an area that was considered fairly fringe as little as 5 or 6 years ago.
So is there a commercial pipeline today? Do we have drugs in clinical testing yet?
Well, we have drugs in the pipeline. None of these companies have put anything on the market, to my knowledge. In terms of trials going on today, I think one of the most exciting ones is the TAME trial. It's targeting aging with metformin, which has received preliminary approval from the FDA, though the people behind the trial are still trying to organize the necessary funds. But essentially that's going to look at the extent with which metformin, which is a common diabetes drug, can help reduce the incidence of cancer and heart disease and Alzheimer's in a population who don't have diabetes, which is rather promising from a regulatory standpoint, because it paves the way to having aging be considered an indicator of a disease, which I think is very important and goes back to your earlier question about whether or not aging should be classified as a disease, because my foundation feels that it's a necessary prerequisite for the clinical evaluation of any future health span extending therapy. Because right now, if a company wants to release a health span extending therapy and get clinical approval for that, they need to target some recognized disease indication. And so today that would mean targeting, a specific age-related disease. Whereas classifying aging as a disease itself opens the door to much wider spread applicability of those potential products.
There have been a number of targets of interest to researchers focused on aging. I'm wondering if we could just touch on a few of those and get your thoughts about how well defined these are today and how helpful they may be as targets for therapeutic interventions. The first of these is DNA damage.
Yeah, well, DNA damage is certainly considered a hallmark of aging, and there are a variety of potential interventions that could be well suited for that, including gene editing technologies and things like that.
How about free radicals?
Yes, that's free radical damage is considered to be, well, it was considered it was the form of damage that underlied a lot of early theories on aging and the causal mechanisms underlying aging. I would say that it's certainly a process that can be intervened upon through small molecules and the like. But free radical damage, I don't think is going to yield a whole lot of concrete results in terms of actual health span extension, just from the results of studies that have focused on that.
How about telomeres?
Sure, telomere attrition is another so-called hallmark of aging. And it was actually the focus of the first longevity company, Geron. And yes, there are a variety of potential therapeutic interventions that could help with that, namely telomerase therapy for one. But that particular form of age-related damage is a little bit tricky because there's an ongoing worry that upregulation of telomerase or introduction of telomerase genes in cells could also feed cancer, in the sense that the large majority of cancers have elongated telomeres and use telomere elongation in order to facilitate their ongoing expansion.
There's been an overall trend in therapeutic development from moving from treating symptoms to addressing the underlying cause of disease. Do the various biological targets of aging hold any promise at getting at specific diseases such as cancer or heart disease or Alzheimer's?
Well, I would argue that interventions that try and intervene on the aging process itself hold the greatest promise for preventing and delaying the onset of some of the diseases that you mentioned, largely just because aging is the largest risk factor for a lot of those diseases and the underlying cause that ultimately facilitates their onset and formation.
How hopeful are you that we'll see therapeutic interventions that provide a significant change to longevity and to health of aging individuals?
Well, it's hard to say, but I would definitely say that I'm a lot more hopeful than I was 6 years ago, when there was not really a longevity industry to speak of. Now there's a lot of money flowing in, and people are starting to take it pretty seriously. And also, this is helped by the fact that somewhat conservative mainstream business personalities are jumping into the fray as well. For instance, Jim Mellon comes to mind. He's a member of our board of trustees. He's often considered the British Warren Buffett. He's a British billionaire who has predicted certain the success of certain markets with a fairly high track record over the years. And he just released a book called Juvenescence: Investing in the Age of Longevity that essentially gives credit to the position that a serious longevity industry is forming, and that it's going to see some significant progress over the coming years.
As we think about the development of life-saving therapies for diseases such as cancer, there have been debates about the cost and access of such therapies, but there doesn't generally seem to be the need to consider the economic, social, political, ethical, and even philosophical implications of developing these therapies. Is aging different? Beyond the science, what do we need to think about in terms of the implications of extending life broadly?
Well, aging is rife with, philosophical and ethical concerns historically, largely because it's been considered for the majority of human history as sort of a sacrosanct process, very tied into our ideals and faiths and things like that. But I think that for the most part, the geroscience community and the aim of both the geroscience research community and the longevity industry is a lot less fraught with some of these ethical concerns than a lot of your viewers and listeners might really be aware of. For instance, a common misnomer is that lifespan extension is the main goal of this endeavor, but really the majority of mainstream geroscientists are focusing on health span extension and compression of morbidity, which is compressing the incidence of age-related disease into the final few years of life. So we're not really talking about immortality here. We're talking about extending the healthy period of patients' lives in which they are relatively free of age-related disease in order to prevent a lot of the diseases that afflict developed nations today. Diseases which, other more reactionary efforts to treat are not really met with a lot of ethical concern.
Franco Cortese, Deputy Director of the Biogerontology Research Foundation. Frank, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.